Hello everybody, and welcome to our final stage for our watercolor project of the Sailboat. And I've seen a lot of your work and I'm just blown away. You did better than I did. So all of you just have done a wonderful job, and I'm very impressed. And I think this was a good exercise. You know, it's actually out of my comfort zone. I don't really paint water scenes very often. I don't live by the water. It's not something that I know. I'm a field and woodland girl, you know. So it was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I really wanted to do it because there's some valuable lessons, especially I think in the sky, and just in the idea that we can have such dramatic values in a painting, you know, and have such beautiful results and still sort of get this sort of dreamy, ethereal look to it. This is not an easy one for me, and maybe not for you either. So I think that's good. It's good to stretch ourselves. And I wanted to continue on with this painting, and I wanted to first say that when we begin a painting like this, any landscape that I begin it really, you know, as loosely as I can, right? As expressively and quickly as I can. So there's some energy and some of that element of chance and serendipity in that first layer. It gives the painting life. Instead of being really, really careful and particular about that first layer, is sort of the idea that we just take a full paintbrush and splash it down and just begin, because the energy that we begin with is the energy that is carried through, right? So that's a really great way to start. And we just were very loose and just let things kind of do what they wanted to do with just a little bit of control here and there. Now, at this point, I need my cloth. There we go. So at this point, we are just going to be refining and adding detail and looking at the picture and saying, what does it need to read the way we want it to read? Okay, so it's sort of, I'm going to bring my palette over here. It's sort of a dance at this point. We're just going to kind of look at each component separately. So the sky, and then the horizon, and the water, and the boat. We're going to finish the boat, and then look at it as an overall picture. Okay, so let's begin. We're going to begin with the boat, and the reason why we did not do the boat last time is that everything was wet, and there's a chance that it all might bleed together and just not look great. So we're going to start with the boat, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some color on the sails. Okay, and I'm going to use just a little bit. I'm trying to think what did I have here? Burnt sienna. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of this yellow, which turned a strange color on my palette. I'm not sure about that. This is the core Indian yellow, and it dried very strange. So I'm just taking a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of Indian yellow. And I want to add a little bit of color to these sails, just so it's not all blue, okay? So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to start at the tip of the sails. Just use my fine brush. I'm using a size 2. And I'm bringing some of that color all the way down the sail, because I want a little bit of color here. It comes all the way down to where it meets the boat. And then I'm just going to use clean water and just sort of soften it. So really, it could be white. It has a glow, right? I'm just kind of softening it over. This is my way of doing it, all right? I want to introduce another color into this. So bring it all the way up to here. And then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to use the same, just really light mix. And I'm going to put some at the top here. And then I'm going to go put a little tiny bit along this edge of the sail. And then really it becomes what's in the center there, that dark area, which we're not really sure if it's another sail or if it's just a different color. I mean, I can't tell. I don't know enough about boats to know any different. But see how I'm just putting a really soft layer of that color on this side. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to take what I mixed up here is a little bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine. And I'm going to put a little bit more ultramarine in it to make it more of a blue-gray. I want it to be on the blue side. And then I'm going to paint that inner area that I see. And it sort of comes down to about here, and then it comes over. It doesn't go all the way to the bottom. So I'm just keeping it very simple. I don't even care that a little bit of it's bleeding into one other area. I'm going to take a little bit more of this golden burnt sienna color and put it along this side. Okay, and that's all I'm going to do now. I might add a little bit more detail on this when I'm done, okay? But I don't, you know, I might even soften this edge. I want it to be very dreamy. And you might want to make your sailboat crisper, okay? I just kind of like this dreamy effect that I'm getting. Now I'm also going to add a little bit more of a shadow on this side of the sail and then, you know, a little bit later. But right now I just want to leave it like this so that dries. And then I'm going to work on the boat. And the same thing, I'm just going to mix more of that burnt sienna and French ultramarine together. Then I get a really dark gray. And I can just paint the boat, the bottom of this boat. This paintbrush is not behaving for me today, so I'm going to use this one. You just need you need a fine point. It doesn't necessarily matter how big the brush is, you just need a fine point. And that one, the point was just getting a little wonky, like hairs were sticking out of it. Okay. So I've got that color there. Now, immediately we notice that right underneath it, there is a shadow that goes into the water. And so I'm just going to paint that. And they're actually attached, and it's a little bit lighter. It goes down, and then it just kind of comes up and goes across and just sort of melts into the boat. Okay, just a little bit. But then we have this whole area of reflection. And I am just going to take my brush and just put in a little bit of this all the way down. And then just push water through it too. Just following it up with water. See how it's very faint. Take some of the golden color. Just add a little bit of that in. All right. And then do the same thing on the other side, the gray color. And just look at your reference for this. It doesn't have to be exact. There's a little bit here, and then there's a space. It just kind of comes down. And then there's one in here. And then I'll go in with water. And we can add a little bit more to that if we need to. And don't be afraid to, if you're going to use the golden color, to put a little bit in there as well. Very, very, very light. All right, it doesn't need to be super dark, and we can enhance that a little bit before we're done. So now that my boat, the basic parts of my boat are done, okay, I might, since it's a little bit drier, I can take some of my gray, and I'm just gonna enhance this bottom part of the sail and make a little connection here. And I'm gonna sort of bring this down and put a little bit of color in there because I see it. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm still going to put a little bit in there. Okay? I don't have to know what it is to know what the shape and the color is that I see. All right, I hope that makes sense. So that's all I'm going to do for the boat right now. Now I'm going to look at the water. And I think all I really need to do, if I took, because I have phthalo blue in here, it's probably not going to lift a whole lot. So what I can do is I can take that blue mix that I used, or just pick a little bit of phthalo blue with a little bit of ultramarine blue, make it really, really, really pale. I still have some of that on my palette, which is great. And I can take it on my brush and I can just go back and forth with little marks. I'm anchoring my hand. And I'm just kind of letting my brush hover over it. And I'm looking at the direction that I see the marks in the water. And I'm just, see how I'm anchoring my wrist. And I'm just really lightly adding in. This paint is very pale, very transparent. And it sort of disappears as it comes up, so I can even go lighter. I see a little bit of it here. And it sort of disappears, right? That's all I need to do for this. Okay, do you see how, I mean, I'm gonna zoom in here. So let's zoom in. You can see it's just barely there. And with this reflection, I can go in and just add a tiny bit more if I need to. We don't want to do too much. It's just not necessary. It's just the hint of it. You know, and sometimes our watercolors will dry a little bit lighter, so we want to go back and add a little bit more. We're looking for it to be effective, and that's effective to me. It's just enough. It's a hint. If I overdo it, it's going to start looking forced, and I don't want that. So I'm working in really, really pale washes. So if I do a little too much, I can always take my rag and just blot it, right? Here I see a little bit more in my reference, so I can add a little bit more. That's all that's necessary, all right? So I'm probably not going to do too much more. I might add a little bit of shadow on this part of the boat. So I'm going to take more of that gray that I made with burnt sienna and ultramarine, and I'm just going to go along the very edge of my sail. So I've got that golden color down. I'm going to go along the very edge of my sail and take clear water and just soften it. I don't want too much, just to give it a little bit more contrast there. And I'm pretty happy with this in here, but I might just enhance the inside of that just a little bit to really make it look like it's in shadow. And then there's a tiny bit of contrast right over here. So I can add that. And then always softening. I don't want just a hard line there. I just want it to be darker. Okay, done with the boat. That's all I'm going to do. To me, it's perfect. Okay, now I want to look at my horizon. And in my reference image, it's very misty. And I really see a lightness on the horizon line. And quite honestly, I feel like I've achieved that here already. But I think I'm going to enhance it just a tiny bit. And so I'm going to take some of my cooler blue, the phthalo blue, and really, really water it out on my paper. on my plate. Just super, super, super transparent. And then I'm gonna go just above where I have that lighter area that I blotted with, and just use my brush to just sort of dance around and give it a little bit more color here and there, and make that little area of fog lifting off the water a little bit more dramatic, okay? And then I can take a brush wet with clean water, and I can sort of dance around the edges of that and pull it up just a little bit to really soften it. Do you see the movement I'm doing? It's almost like little circular movements with my brush. My brush is barely touching the paper, and that just sort of blended it in. And then I can always take my cloth or my tissue and just lightly touch it to make sure it's soft. All that did was enhance that little bit of cloud at the bottom. Now over here I see a little bit of ghosting from where I put water around. So I'm going to do the same thing. Remember, we put water around the sailboat so the paint wouldn't go in. So I can do the same thing, and I can take this really, really transparent paint and I can work it right up to the sailboat and sort of dance it around everywhere else to sort of blend in where we see a little bit of that ghosting. This is super, super transparent paint. So even if you didn't blend it or blot it, it's still going to look okay when it dries. But you see, I'm just sort of trying to go back and forth and get rid of a little bit of that ghosting that I had. I call it that for lack of a better word. I want this in here to be really dreamy, but I can still take my paintbrush and sort of flick around just to enhance certain areas. So I feel like this is still, so I can add a little bit more where I see that lighter area. Just bring it right up to the sailboat. Just sort of dance around. That fixed it. It's beautiful now. I'm not touching it anymore. Now that we have the blue surrounding it and we've got more detail in here, you see how putting a little bit of that golden color really makes the sailboat glow, because burnt sienna is an orange-based paint, and we warmed it up a little bit with the Indian yellow, but it's still the opposite of blue, right? It's like a red-orange, pale red-orange, and so it's going to be of great contrast when we put it next to blue, and that makes it pop out and glow. So now let's look at more of the sky, and I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of my phthalo blue because it's bright, and I'm using it very, very transparent. I'm really, really, really watering it down. And I'm going to look at my reference image and I'm going to see if there's any areas where I want to sort of enhance what I've got here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some nice hard edges. I'm just dancing my brush in there. So I'm not getting any hard lines. I'm just sort of skimming over the paper and making it. Now I'm just dropping color in because it's wet, just to darken that up just a little bit. I really want to enhance that area. But you see, by not just doing this, by just dancing the brush around, I get a more natural effect with the paint. I'm going to do a little bit up here too. Very transparent paint. I'm just working my brush around the sky and sort of pulling out areas that I want to pull out. I'm using a little bit more ultramarine now with a tiny bit of phthalo. Still pretty transparent, dancing that brush around. Just sort of enhancing what I see. Really like this area here, and it just, the contrast is not great enough, so I'm just adding a little bit of in there, dancing my brush around. If I ever feel like it's too much, I can always take a tissue and just blot it, and it just softens it a little bit, but I'm really happy with that. And then the same over here, I'm going to take some more of this transparent mix and sort of look at the underside of these clouds. I'm really happy with this here, but under here, there's some areas where I just think it could have used a little more oomph. dancing around. I'm going to take some clean water and dance around also because I just want to soften what I've done. And I'm also going to soften a little bit on this side. Clean water and just dance the brush around. And that gives that sort of wispy edge. Now, I really want to add a little bit more contrast right in here. And because this is wet, I can now just dab paint and let it just move on its own and mix and mingle and make a soft sort of contrast in this area. Because I've already wet the paper with those little dancing movements, it's not going to look stiff. The paint is just working its way in, and I can just move it all the way to the edge. Just wanted a little bit more contrast in there. Then dance it around here where I want to blend it, and then touch in a little bit of water. So you see, this is not, it's not rocket science. It's really intuitive, and it's really just looking at your painting at this point and seeing what would make it better. You know, where it needs a little bit more contrast, where it needs to glow a little more. And so now I'm going to go back to my gray. So I'm going to use some of the burnt sienna and add it to my blue mix to really gray it out. I don't want it to be brown. I want it to be a blue gray, and I want it to be really, really transparent. So I can take and add lots of water to it and even dip my brush in more water. I want it to be really transparent. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to start dancing my brush around to give myself a little bit of shadow too. All right. And then once I do that, I can take water and smooth it out, because you'll notice that most of the cloud area is in shadow. And then some of it is light, but it's not like regular. It's very random and uneven. It's got a big hair on my... I think I can get that off. Well, we'll just wait till it dries. And before this dries, I always want to push back into it. So I just want this to be random. Little bits of gray, blue-gray, within the white, sort of to make those highlights stand out even more, okay? I don't need to be really fussy with this. I can just go in and just mute it down with more water. All right, but now those bright white highlights stand out even more. And I could take more of this gray and just touch it here and there to let it spread around and be more effective. Again, if I ever feel like it's too much, I always have my rag or my tissue that I can blot, but I really like that. Now I'm looking at this area here, and I think that's the one place that I need to add more. So I'm going to take more of my ultramarine and just touch more of my phthalo, get a nice transparent mix going, and I'm going to go in here again and just, it's still wet, right? We've got good paper, so it's still wet. I'm just adding a little bit more and pulling it over to the side. Just a little bit more, and just bringing it down. And then I've got clear water, damp brush, just to sort of dance it down here and soften it. I'm really happy now. This is great. So the only place now that I feel like I need a tiny bit more contrast is right here. So phthalo blue, tons and tons of water in it. And again, the same thing. I'm just dancing it around a little bit. Give myself a little bit more color right there. Clean water and softening Same motion, just sort of dancing it around. And then I can take my cloth and just blot the upper edge so it disappears. There, I'm done. So that's really, you know, it's going to depend on your own painting, and to kind of see where your initial layer needs more oomph, or maybe it does. Maybe your sky is perfect the way it is and you want to touch it at all. Maybe the contrast wasn't enough like mine, and so you need to add a little bit more. But the main thing to remember is that sort of dancing brush technique where you're just being very intuitive with it, and you're not going back and forth or not painting with it, but just sort of using it just to model the color in very softly in very transparent layers. Start light, get darker if you need to, like I did over here, okay? And then you always have a clean damp brush to soften and a tissue to blot if you need to do that. That often helps. Contrast is key, looseness is key, squinting your eyes and looking at your reference image to just really see those areas of contrast in a more dreamy way. That's all we need to do. So I hope that makes sense anyways. So I'm going to remove my tape, because that's always sort of a fun moment when we're done with the painting and we can remove our tape. And I really like it. I'm really glad we did this. So let's see here. Perfect. There we go. Our finished sailboat. So I hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, it's a great little project to do, and you can do it in chunks. You don't have to you don't have to feel overwhelmed by it, and you can do it in your own way. It doesn't have to look exactly like your reference image. Never forget that. Okay, what you want to come up with is a dreamy scene of a sailboat drenched in light on a blue sky day. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm going to be also doing a dandelion lesson today and uploading that with some more information about me being gone next week and that kind of stuff. So I will see you again soon. Take care.